quick Devar Torah. This week's Parsha, after we also get into something one of the most controversial parts of the Torah. That is the war against Midian. And it's very controversial because the laws that, the commandment that the Jews are given, it's extremely harsh to kill all the men. And then after the war, the Jews think, okay, we've solved the war. Moshe calls in the officers and rebukes them because they did not kill the women. And it's like, wait a minute, this is the Torah? What's going on here? And it's much deeper. First of all, it's not a war of revenge. It was not of revenge, of vengeance. This was a war for justice. People forget this. And so the number of questions come up. Why Midian? Why not Moab? Because the Moabites also took part in the whole issue of Balpor, of this whole mess. The answer is the Jews are going to be going through Moab. Okay, so in other words, they had reason to fear the Jews. They had a justifiable reason to be afraid. The Midianites did not. We're not going to go anywhere near Midian. So that's a major distinction. They joined in willingly. The reason for the attack on the women is very simple. The women were willing partners in what happened. They were not innocent bystanders. Cosby was a princess. Okay? She was a Midianite princess. She comes, she volunteers for this service. And another important factor was a lesson that if you do certain things, it is unacceptable, period. I mentioned that if you look at history, when the Hungarians arrived in Europe in about the 7th, 8th, and 9th, 10th centuries, they were running around, pillaging, looting, raping, having a grand time, so to speak, until 950. In 950, you had the Battle of Augsburg. Otto I of Prussia faced the Hungarian army, and at the end of the battle, 7 Hungarian soldiers were left. 7. That tells you pretty much what happened in that battle. The Hungarians returned to Hungary and decided farming is a nice occupation. Basically, they had learned their lesson by being pretty much slaughtered. That everything they had done, the Europeans, the Prussians had said, this is it, we will not put up with this. And the same thing with Midian. This is it, we cannot put up with this. And it was another thing also for a lesson for the Jews, because one of the issues that we have to deal with is the immorality from the inside. In other words, if we are immoral internally or unethical internally, then we won't stand up to real evil. And there's real evil out there. So, one of the problems, as I mentioned in the past, in 1940, the largest army in Europe was the French army. And when when Hitler gave the order to invade France, the German generals were afraid. This is the largest army in Europe we're coming up against. And he said, don't worry about it, because he knew something. Internally, the French were weak. They had spent years going about how they shouldn't really defend themselves or anything like that. When you are internally divided, when you internally question your mission, then the enemy can really defeat you. When you are strong internally, when you are united, you might disagree about this and that about your mission, but you realize there is a mission. And the Jews have to realize that we are on a mission from God. And because of that mission, we have to be united in the knowledge of that mission. We can disagree about details, but we can't disagree that there is a mission. And that is what the danger of Midian posed. They set into motion the questioning of what is our mission. And that's why the justice against them had to be extremely harsh. Something to think about.